Have you ever sat in a meeting, said almost nothing, and yet, when the room had to decide, they glanced at you? You didn't raise your voice. You didn't fight for control. You just existed calm, unshaken, contained. And somehow, you became the anchor. Let's break that illusion. People think dominance is about being loud, about taking space, about pushing your voice into the room. But the most dominant people, they don't fight to be heard. They design the atmosphere others breathe in. This isn't charisma. This isn't luck. This is passive frame insertion. A silent game of setting the context so others follow your frame without knowing it. Let me give you a real example. In a group setting, the one who speaks least but carries silence like a blade often becomes the center of gravity. They don't rush to explain. They don't correct every misinterpretation. They don't seek agreement. Instead, they make others adjust around them. That's the first rule of passive frame insertion. You don't move toward them. You make them move toward you. It's not about controlling the conversation. It's about controlling the emotional context the conversation happens in. Think about that. Power isn't always declared. It's often felt. And here's the paradox that will drive this entire video. You don't need to take the wheel if you've already tilted the road. They'll walk your path, thinking it was theirs all along. So, in the next 20 minutes, I'll show you exactly how to master this invisible force, how to command attention without demanding it, how to shape perception without saying a word too much. Because once you master passive frame insertion, you no longer need to win arguments. You just make them irrelevant. Let's begin. Most people think control begins with a loud voice, a bold statement, a sharp directive. But that's noise. And noise is easy to ignore. Real framing, it happens before words. It's not what you say. It's what they feel before you speak. Imagine this. Two people walk into a room. Person A heads straight to the front. They clear their throat. They launch into a monologue. They state their case. They believe they're taking control. But person B, they walk in, slower. They don't speak. They glance around the room just once. They don't sit. They stand exactly where the light hits their face. Hands behind their back. Eyes still. Posture loose, but alert. They wait. And slowly, the attention shifts. People stop listening to A. They start watching B. Why? Because B didn't try to own the room. They let the room adjust to them. Frame doesn't come from what you say. It comes from what others feel they need to respond to. And that starts with atmosphere, your stillness, your pace, your silence, your refusal to explain. Each moment becomes a signal. Each delay becomes pressure. Each breath becomes design. A strong frame is never declared. It's installed quietly through posture, pace, and presence. This is the principle of passive frame insertion. You don't need to argue. You don't need to convince. You just shape the air. And here's the deeper layer. When you speak less, people listen more. Because silence forces their minds to fill the gap, to anticipate, to interpret, to adjust. They begin to react to your presence, not your words. And that reaction is the frame. Because the real rule of dominance is simple. If they wait for you, you've already won. Let that sink in. We're just getting started. Power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears routine. Let me explain. You don't need to assert dominance through words. You do it through patterns, through small, repeated behaviors that rewire how people respond to you. Picture this: every Monday morning. The meeting starts at 9. Everyone else is seated. Papers shuffled. Laptops open. Buzzing. But the boss, he always walks in at 9:07. Never rushed. Never apologizing. Just present. And when he enters, something strange happens. People stop mid-sentence. They adjust their posture. Silence falls. He's never said a word about it. Never asked for the room. But the room is his. That's ritual-based framing. His lateness isn't disorganization. It's programming. By doing it consistently, he's installed a behavioral loop. A ritual that signals his arrival is the true beginning. And now, everyone unconsciously waits for that cue. Because here's the deeper truth. People don't obey authority. They obey rhythm. If you can control what feels normal, you don't need to ask for respect. It's already been rehearsed. It works in subtle places too. You always stand in the same spot at events. You always leave your coffee half-finished at meetings. You always pause 5 seconds before responding to a challenge. It becomes recognizable, predictable. And in that predictability, you gain leverage. Why? Because people crave stability. And when you become the constant, they unconsciously center around you. That's the game. It's not about the content of what you do. It's about the consistency of how you do it. Control isn't loud. It's rehearsed. And when people rehearse around your behavior, you own the stage without speaking. Let this land. Frame is less about force and more about inevitability. If your actions set the rhythm, then their minds will dance to your beat, even when you're completely silent. Let's go deeper. Let me tell you something unsettling. Sometimes, the most powerful presence in the room is the one that isn't there. Not showing up is not the same as being gone. It's a move, a pressure, a signal that shifts the atmosphere before a word is spoken. Here's what I mean. Imagine a heated debate at work. Voices rise. Opinions clash. Everyone's trying to win the room. But there's one person, the one everyone's waiting for. And they're not here. No text. No input. Just absence. And yet, you can feel their frame weighing on the conversation. Someone says, "Well, if she were here, I wonder what she'd say." Another adds, "He'd probably just shut this down in 2 lines." That's not passive. That's strategic absence. It installs a psychological placeholder, a space people fill with your imagined authority, with your hypothetical judgment. And here's the trick: because you're not reacting, you stay above the noise. You become the unknown variable, unpredictable, unchallenged, unshockable. You didn't speak, but you still inserted a frame, one that makes others shrink, soften, recalibrate in anticipation of what you might have done. That's the genius. You shift the frame without even being in the room. Why does it work? Because humans fear the undefined. And in your silence, you give them just enough ambiguity to make them spiral, to guess, to project. And projection is the most manipulable state a mind can enter. Silence is not withdrawal. It's psychological priming. You're not avoiding the conversation. You're letting it shape around you without ever touching it. This is the move of those who understand tension, who don't need to defend or correct, because their presence lives even in their absence. So next time you're pulled into noise, try not responding. Let the silence do the shaping. Let's move forward. The game's just beginning. Let me tell you something unsettling. Sometimes, the most powerful presence in the room is the one that isn't there. Not showing up is not the same as being gone. It's a move, a pressure, a signal that shifts the atmosphere before a word is spoken. Here's what I mean. Imagine a heated debate at work. Voices rise. Opinions clash. Everyone's trying to win the room. But there's one person, the one everyone's waiting for. And they're not here. No text. No input. Just absence. And yet, you can feel their frame weighing on the conversation. Someone says, "Well, if she were here, I wonder what she'd say." Another adds, "He'd probably just shut this down in 2 lines." That's not passive. That's strategic absence. It installs a psychological placeholder, a space people fill with your imagined authority, with your hypothetical judgment. And here's the trick. Because you're not reacting, you stay above the noise. You become the unknown variable, unpredictable, unchallenged, unshackable. You didn't speak, but you still inserted a frame, one that makes others shrink, soften, recalibrate in anticipation of what you might have done. That's the genius. You shift the frame without even being in the room. Why does it work? Because humans fear the undefined. And in your silence, you give them just enough ambiguity to make them spiral, to guess, to project. And projection is the most manipulable state a mind can enter. Silence is not withdrawal. It's psychological priming. You're not avoiding the conversation. You're letting it shape around you without ever touching it. This is the move of those who understand tension, who don't need to defend or correct, because their presence lives even in their absence. So next time you're pulled into noise, try not responding. Let the silence do the shaping. Let's move forward. The game's just beginning. Not every move needs to be loud. Not every shift needs to be announced. In the game of silent influence, subtlety is the weapon. And gestures, when precise, speak louder than explanation ever could. Let me walk you through a scene. You're in a meeting. Someone across the table challenges your idea. They expect a pushback, a counter, maybe even a debate. But instead of reacting, you pause. You look at them just long enough to be noticed. You raise an eyebrow, then look away. That's it. No defense, no escalation, no words. Yet suddenly, they start backtracking. I mean, what I meant was, they fumble. They shift. You just reset the frame without speaking. Why does this work? Because subtle gestures bypass resistance. They hit the subconscious directly. They whisper into the unguarded mind. Now imagine this. You're seated, calm. Someone makes a dramatic statement. And you slowly place your hand on the table, not to interrupt, but to anchor. Suddenly, the room changes. The energy collapses into your center. Another move, you nod, but not in agreement. In acknowledgement without endorsement. A tilt of the head that says, I see you, but I'm not moved. It's disarming, because it's not confrontation. It's containment. Each move calibrated. Pause weaponized. Subtlety isn't weakness. It's the high art of control. You're not reacting. You're directing without looking like you're trying to. Because when you stay composed, when your gestures are precise, when your presence does the speaking, you bend perception without ever raising your voice. Let's move on. It's time to go deeper. Have you ever been in a room where someone was speaking confidently, maybe even aggressively, and yet somehow you knew they weren't leading? They were loud, but the real control was quiet, still, watching. That's passive frame insertion. You don't need to fight for the spotlight. You just need to control the container. Let them pour their energy into it. Here's how it works. Imagine this. Someone's explaining their point. With passion, with force. They're trying to win the conversation. You lean back. Slight nod. Eyes focused. Breathing slow. Then you say, interesting. That's one way to see it. You didn't agree. You didn't resist. You didn't flinch. But you did something more powerful. You reframed without confrontation. That phrase, it seems neutral, but it's not. It's a soft wall, a silent redirect, an emotional dead end wrapped in politeness. Suddenly, they're unsure. They feel the need to clarify, to prove, to adjust. And in doing so, they're now inside your psychological perimeter. Here's the hidden move. They think they're still leading, but their momentum is now being rerouted by you. Subtly, invisibly. You didn't insert new ideas. You just allowed their ideas to echo in a frame you pre-installed. Like walking into a room that smells different. They can't explain it, but they feel it. That's what you've built: atmosphere. Psychological gravity. And most importantly, direction. Because when someone starts speaking in your frame, you don't need to say much. You just reinforce the atmosphere. A simple nod, a subtle breath, a shift in posture, and they'll keep talking, digging deeper into the perception you already defined. Let this sink in. They're speaking, but in your frame. That's passive domination. No confrontation, no resistance, just gravity. The kind that doesn't pull them in with force, but with inevitability. Let's go further, because in the next part, you'll learn how gestures alone can warp the frame without a single word. Let me show you something most people never notice. It's not what you respond to. It's what you choose not to that sets the real frame. Most people, they feel the need to acknowledge everything. Every emotion. Every complaint. Every little dig. But high-level communicators, they choose. They filter. They recognize only what strengthens their frame. And when you do that, you start to reshape how others speak to you. Let's break it down with a real moment. Imagine this in a relationship or negotiation. The other person says, "I just feel like you're not really hearing me. I feel disrespected. I feel dismissed." Most people react. They defend. They comfort. They fall into the emotional vortex. But the person who leads the frame, they respond like this, noted. Anything else? Cold, yes. But clear. Powerful. Here's what just happened. You didn't invalidate their emotion. You didn't agree. You didn't argue. You simply logged it and moved forward. This is selective recognition. You chose what matters to the conversation. You sent an invisible message. I see what you said, but I don't center it. And when you do this consistently, people begin to shape their words for your attention. They chase recognition like a reward. Here's the psychological principle at play. People adjust their behavior based on what gets acknowledged. And you, silently, are the gatekeeper. You reward what serves your direction. You skip what weakens it. This doesn't mean you ignore everything. It means you become surgical. You make others feel like your attention is earned, not expected. And that changes everything. From boardrooms to relationships to everyday power plays. Because when people don't know which part of their message will land, they start to self-filter. They try to please the invisible algorithm you. Let's stamp this in. Recognition is the gate. Control what enters, and you control the game. Now, let's close this loop. In the final section, I'll show you how to apply all of this without a single command. Only gravity. Only frame. And that's where real dominance lives. Let's be honest. You don't need to explain the rules. If everyone already acts like you're the one who wrote them, that's the art of passive frame insertion. No confrontation. No push. No chase. Just gravity. Just presence calibrated with surgical control. So here's your assignment. For the next 24 hours, try this. Don't assert. Don't defend. Don't try to win the room. Just own the space. Be deliberate with your gaze. Respond with nothing more than a subtle nod. Let others fill the silence. Let them feel you, without hearing you. Watch what happens when you no longer seek to influence, because the frame already obeys your rhythm. This is not a tactic. This is identity. You're not inserting opinions. You're installing context. You're not giving answers. You're building the boundaries within which others speak. You don't fight for power. You create the room where power moves toward you. And that's the final key. Power doesn't need words. It just needs presence calibrated to control perception. Frame it right, and they'll walk the path you never even pointed to. Pause. Let that land. Then, disappear. Because from now on, your silence sets the atmosphere, and they'll feel the rules without needing to hear a single one. End.